welcome to another episode of the Andre The Beast Crayton Show with Yolanda M. Smith. Today is a very special show. Um, as a parent myself, I know the struggles that we go through with trying to make sure that we provide the right environment for our children. And especially in today's world where the power of the internet and being able to globally touch a person here and there, the resources and stuff is crazy. So a lot of times we don't know what our kids are going to be exposed to, but as a parent, we have to learn to kind of navigate that. And trust me, it's not an easy task. There's a lot of times where I know personally when I was raising my daughter that I wish that I had, let's be real, some type of coach. At the time, the coach was the Dr. Spock or Dr. Zeus book of parenting. It didn't work all the way. But I am pleased to have on the show today no other than the one and only parenting coach herself, Miss Kim Muench, as in Pinch, Dr. P, the Muench. Welcome to the show, Kim.
Thanks, Andre. I'm so happy to talk to you today.
Hey, so I'm glad I got it. I'm glad I got it right. Because you said Pinch Muench. Tell me a little bit about Kim and who Kim is.
Sure. Well, I grew up in the Midwest. I grew up in the Milwaukee area, and I'm the oldest of three. My parents with very traditional upbringing, and life was, I would say, quote unquote, normal until I was a freshman in college, mid-freshman year. I found out that I was pregnant, and I needed to deliver that message to my parents. And of course, as an 18-year-old who was pregnant, it was frightening to think about what the future would bring, and also telling your parents that information. So my mom was supportive from the beginning. My dad, not so much. And he did not feel that I would be a suitable parent or could handle it at the age of 18. So ultimately, he gave me an ultimatum towards the end of my pregnancy and said, if you decide not to give your baby up for adoption, you can't come home. And so it was a very emotional choice, obviously, but I felt strongly during the entire pregnancy that I was meant to be this child's day-to-day parent. And so I made the difficult decision to go against what my parents wanted. I mean, my mom was supportive of me. However, she wasn't going to cross my dad in order to support me, put it that way. Right. So bottom line, I moved out. I, as a very, very pregnant young woman, went to the downtown Milwaukee welfare office, applied for benefits, and moved out of my family's home on $360 a month in food stamps. And it was clear to me, and that it was a very humbling experience. And several months into it, I realized that if I tried to go out and get a job, that I would then my benefits would go down. And so I was trying to figure out how I was going to be able to move out of the system. And my mom did step in and chose to babysit for my son during the day so I could get a job as a secretary. So ultimately, she did step in and support me. I could not have done what I did without her help.
Let's go back a little bit. Not to cut the story off, but let's go back and kind of piece this together for the viewers. Now, let's take the viewers into the mind of an 18-year-old freshly pregnant. Rules are set in place in the household. You're definitely a daddy's girl, like most girls are in the household. Tell me about how that was and how difficult that might have been going to your parents and explaining and what that was really like. Let's try to go piece by piece here.
I knew that my dad did not like my boyfriend, and so that made it extra difficult. And I am sure that my dad probably did not like my boyfriend because he wasn't in college. He really didn't have a job. And I was very enamored with him. I missed curfew several times before I went to college. And so I think those were all the reasons going in that my dad didn't care for him. So that made it extra difficult for me to share that information because I knew my mom would be more understanding and empathetic. I went to her first and she told my dad, and then I was summoned back from college to have a conversation with my dad, who very clear, made it very clear that he was extremely disappointed in me.
What was your
And
dad's occupation at that time? He seemed
uh,
pretty stern. What was your dad's occupation? What was he doing for a career?
he managed money for people. He's a
Okay.
money manager.
Okay.
So, and I had a Catholic private school upbringing. Um, I think in part, if I look back on it, it had a lot to do with how it would look to other people. I'm sure that that contributed to his attitude.
Okay.
Um, so regardless, I finished out my freshman year. I was 6 months pregnant when I finished my freshman year and came home for the summer. And when I came home for the summer, I nannied every day because I knew I needed to make money, but I didn't want to be in the public eye. So I nannied for a couple that had a brand new baby, which gave me experience with a brand new baby, quite frankly.
Right.
But it was towards the end of the summer. My son's birthday was yesterday. So towards the end of the summer, he very much said, "You'll either give this baby up for adoption or you won't come home." And so it required me, fortunately, to be honest with you, I didn't know what welfare was. The woman that I nannied for that summer told me, if you need to move out, this is what you can do. And she helped me figure out where I needed to go and
So
what
you
I
did have
needed to do.
somebody there to navigate, even though,
Yeah.
but
Yeah. I
what do
know.
you do when your dad gives you that ultimatum and you don't have the resources, nor did you have the ability? Who did you go to talk to them? What did your mom say about it? I mean, because this is now a family crisis.
Yeah. And I'm sure my parents have since divorced, and I'm sure that that first major issue was one of the things that probably led to their divorce, I would think. They didn't divorce until many years later, but I'm sure that the incident and the situation with me caused a lot of strife in my parents' marriage. So how did I navigate it? Again, I had this wonderful lady I was nannying for that kind of understood the situation and was willing to at least share with me how to go about it. I had to go, and then the other problem was that my boyfriend, my son's father, wanted nothing to do, really. He really wasn't ready to be a dad, and I kind of forced it along. And like, he took me to the welfare office, but he wouldn't go in with me. Like, I had to do it by myself because he just wouldn't support it. So suffice it to say, he and I had a tumultuous relationship the first 2 years of my son's life, and then I decided I needed to get out of that because it was detrimental to me. He was never mean or short-tempered with my son. It was me that he would take things out on. But come to find out, after I left that relationship, he turned his focus and his abuse onto our son, and I didn't know that till many years later when my son was in active addiction.
So, do you think that, I know you can't speak for him, but based on now looking at it now, do you think maybe all that abuse that was impacted on you guys, first from you now to your son, maybe had to do with the fact that you made him accountable and he probably wasn't ready to be accountable?
Yeah, I'm sure that was it. Plus, in looking back, I'm sure that he probably grew up in some kind of abusive situation, but this is not, when we were dating at 18 and 19 years of age, it wasn't something that we really talked about. But I
Right.
do think he didn't have, I don't think he had the tools to be able to parent and the maturity to be able to parent the way that I needed and wanted him to.
What was the reason that you decided to go forth with having the child? I mean, that's a big step. You only had two ultimatums. What went through your head to say, you know what, I know I'm ready to be a mom?
Well, I think part of it was, to be brutally honest with you, as an 18-year-old, I
Yeah.
had friends that, I mean, all of my friends were saying to me, "You can't have that baby, Kim. Like, don't ruin your life." You know, so I had a lot of people telling me different things to do. And I think part of it, to be honest with you, was I was afraid of the pain that would come along with terminating the pregnancy, and so I put it
Okay.
off.
Okay.
Part of it was also I always loved babysitting. I loved babies,
Right.
and I just couldn't envision every time I envisioned that I think it would have been have really highly detrimental to me emotionally to have gone through with it.
So after you have you make the decision to have the child, what
Mhm.
next? You know, did you get married? You married him. So what was the life
No,
like moving forward?
I
Did you
didn't
marry him?
marry him.
Oh,
I
you
didn't marry
said
him.
no. Okay. So then what's the
Fortunately,
journey?
well, so okay, so my dad, part of the process here was my dad said the two of you need to get married, even though he didn't like the guy. He
Okay.
said you have to get married because, of course, in my dad's eye, it looks better at least if I'm married. And fortunately, both of us at the time said no, we're not going to do that. So fortunately, I didn't make that additional commitment of marriage. So
Okay.
we were together the first two and a half years of my son's life, and it was difficult. It was financially straining and stressful, and just adjusting to being parents is obviously a big adjustment.
Right.
But it became his temper and his verbal abuse became more and more often and more intense, and he was kind of trying to isolate me from family and friends and things, and then it turned into physical violence, and once it turned to physical violence, I decided that was it. I have to get out of this. And so he stalked me. I mean, like, it was pretty intense, Andre. Like, it was, to get out of it was not an easy situation, and that made
You was what,
co-parenting
21 at that time, maybe 20, 21? But you had a baby at
20.
18. So 20.
I was like 21. I was like 21 because I turned 19 right after my son was born. So I was about 21 years old and just trying to navigate,
Right.
because he did stalk me. Like, he did not make it easy, and we still had to co-parent.
Did you share this information with your parents? Was there a support group when you was going through this abuse in the household at the age about 20, 21, 22?
I mean, I had a coworker that would listen, and she was supportive. She was an older mom. She was divorced, and she would listen and she was supportive. I don't know. I think because my dad, more so than my mom, made it clear that they didn't like my son's father, that it made it difficult for me to go to my
Hmm.
parents and kind of let them know what was going on. I did have to. There was a point at which I had to, like, it was a middle of the night kind of situation, and he was banging on the door, and I did call my parents, and the police. And that was kind of the culmination of him shifting away from stalking me. And then very quickly after that, he had a new girlfriend, and very shortly after that, got married. So,
You probably was
but again,
like, hey, thank goodness this has happened for him then.
yeah, yeah, I hated it, to be honest with you. I'm sure, and they were married a long time, so I'm sure that she probably endured a lot of abuse herself. But and I feel bad for that for her. But and what I didn't realize, again, when I left the relationship, was because he was never harsh with our son. I didn't realize that once I left, he would turn that towards my son.
Take us down that part during the transformation of your son and how you was able to navigate to not only help yourself to overcome, but help your son to overcome.
Well, okay, so I guess what I to fill in a little bit here, um, like I said, I left the relationship. I still had to co-parent
Mm.
with his dad. I ended up getting married and having 4 other children with my husband. And so we co-parented. He would come back and forth, living between two very different homes. And when my son got to be a teenager, I had to see his dad less often because my son got a driver's license, and I
Right.
wasn't as in his dad's drinking had escalated at that point. But I also knew that I felt that because my son was honest with me about the drinking and about sometimes his dad would get angry. He didn't share nearly as much, but I didn't, because he was a teen boy, I didn't worry about him as much. I figured he could handle himself with his dad.
Right.
It wasn't until a long time later, when my son was in treatment for alcoholism, that I truly understood the depth of the verbal and physical abuse that he received at the hands of his dad.
How does that make you feel when he was sharing that with you? And when did you suspect that your son started having an alcohol problem?
Um, my son started drinking to cope with anxiety and symptoms of OCD and depression at 15.
Mm.
I did not know until he was 20 and he called asking for help that I don't want to say I didn't think he ever drank, but I didn't know how he was
Extent.
using alcohol to cope.
Mhm.
But in when he was in treatment, I learned that he had started drinking, taking alcohol from our cabinet when he was 15 to be able to go to sleep at night. Also used other drugs, but alcohol was his drug of choice per se. So it made me, I was never angry. Some parents, I think, would get very angry because we ultimately asked him to leave our house at 18 because there had been several instances of alcohol missing, even though he would tell me, I didn't take it, I didn't take it. Like, he would look me in the eye, and
Right.
I was never I was never angry with my son about lying or about how he coped, because in learning about the treatment that he received, I understood. And even if we had gotten angry and punished him, I'm not sure that that would have changed the trajectory and the
Right.
course of what he was going to go through.
What was the impact like in your home now? Because now you're married. You have an older son, but you have other children now. So take the viewers down. What's it like in your mind? Because that's your son. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
How do you keep harmony and balance, but still at the same time try to educate your new husband, who this had to be totally new to him too, foreign, because you recognize what's about to happen, but you got to navigate this whole house and still help your son at the same time.
Right. I definitely felt over the years, especially as my son became a teenager, that there was growing tension between my husband and my son. My son was not a studious, he wasn't really into school. And, that was important to my husband and I, very important to my husband. And so that could be very triggering to him at times. Um, they didn't have I think in the beginning, when I married my husband and my son was just 3.5, so my husband's been involved in my son's life, basically his
Yeah.
entire life. Initially, the first several years went well. It was during those teenage years that I got caught in the middle more often, trying to balance my son and having a first teenager, and trying to figure out what was normal teen behavior and what might be something to worry about,
Right.
and my husband, his feeling about what a teenager should look like.
Correct. Correct. So with that said, were there how did you navigate with the parent? Because a lot of this seemed like it took place during the interactions of the child going from home to home. Because naturally, you said there was some abuse going on in the house. So naturally, a lot of that stuff was also getting feedback once he came back to your environment.
Yeah, I would definitely say, in looking back at it, it always took my son a day or 2 to kind of
Readjust.
get back to normal. Yeah, and I didn't understand that, obviously, at the time. In fact, I probably thought it was kind of annoying. He would be a little bit more abrasive, and, it just took him some time to get back into our family dynamics. And truth be told, I think part of my son's drinking, and I've said this and I wrote it in my book, I think he didn't feel 100% accepted or welcome in either environment. And so I think it made it that much more difficult. His dad had certain demands and certain things that he wanted when he was at dad's house. And we had a family and other kids, and the dynamic was different at our house.
Hmm.
So he was trying to fit in two different environments all the time.
When did the call for help come out from your son?
So as I mentioned, I was raised in Wisconsin, and we got married there and had our kids there, and my husband took a job in 2007 in Texas. So at that point, my oldest son had graduated high school, and he had moved out because we had this confrontation about alcohol with him. So he had moved out. He had moved in with his dad at that time. And we moved to Texas in May of 2008. So we moved in the spring of 2007. In May of 2008 is when my son called me and said, "Mom, I've lost the last 3 days of my life to alcohol. I've spent all day recovering from an alcohol binge. I need help."
Wow.
And that was the beginning of a long, like several months of major ups and downs before getting him into inpatient treatment. Ended up bringing him down to Texas and putting him in inpatient treatment. Um, and that wasn't the end of his active addiction either. He relapsed a handful of times, including when his dad died. But that ultimately, his dad dying at the age of 42 of alcohol, I think is what, even though he had a temporary relapse after that, ultimately is what pulled him back into wanting to long-term sobriety. And he's been sober for 13 years.
Congratulations on that. Congratulations. When
Yeah.
What were some of your son's biggest fears going through this journey? I know you said you did share a lot of that in the book, but tell the viewers, what were some of the things that you looked at as a mother with him sharing with you and go, I had no idea. I might have seen it. I should have addressed it. I'm sorry, or I had no idea. Because I think let me do it where it makes a little bit more sense. I think, man, you talked about this yesterday. As a parent, and a lot of times when we're dealing with, let's call it what it is, dysfunctional relationships, a lot of times it's easy for us to say, let me go over here and I'm safe as a parent, but the child still has to go navigate on both sides of the journey here. From a parent standpoint, what were some of the things that your son shared with you that you go, wow, you know what? It was there and I didn't see it, and I wish I could have did something different.
Well, I think there were times when my son feared for his life, that his life was threatened. I didn't know that. And of course, hearing that, I mean, I did have a beautiful discussion with my son at one point where he was being more sharing about, I still probably don't know everything that he
Right.
experienced, but I learned some of it. But there was a conversation that we had at one point during his treatment where he said, "Mom," and I was taking accountability for my part, because
Right.
I needed to acknowledge what was my part in it, but it didn't help my son for me to get stuck there. I needed to acknowledge where I had contributed, but I wasn't going to get stuck there. But he had said to me, "Mom, I'm who I am today because of what I've experienced, and I'm happy, not happy. I don't think he said happy. I don't regret anything I've experienced because it's brought me to where I am today. And I don't blame you. And I don't, So, and of course, that was incredibly comforting, obviously, to hear, hard to hear, right? Um, but I tried to have the best relationship that I could with him during his high school years. I know that was a more difficult time. I think that was really when things escalated at times. But I had 4 other kids, and
Right.
so I could beat myself up as any parent could all day long about all the things that I missed, but that doesn't serve my son at this point in his life. I need to acknowledge where I was contributing by not seeing or not knowing,
Right.
but to sit in that doesn't serve my son.
Let me ask a question. What were some of the things that you talked about a little bit? What were some of the things that you wish you had have addressed prior?
There were times when my son wouldn't get, it was very difficult to get him up and moving for school in the morning. So I think what you're asking me is, were there things that I was seeing that,
Correct. Correct.
yes. Okay. So odd smells from my son's bedroom, and found out years later he was, and I did search his room sometimes,
Mhm.
but he was actually brewing wine in his closet, and I didn't know that. So there were weird smells, but I didn't know if that was weird teenage boy smells or what it
Right.
was. Come to find years later, he was making alcohol in his room. There were times when I couldn't get him up and moving for school, and that was as a result of his drinking the night before or smoking marijuana the night before. I mean, him having to medicate himself to sleep made it very difficult for me to wake him up in the morning. And I just wrote it off as like he hates school. He's a teenager. He sleeps late in the morning. Like I justified, I think for parents, if I look back, I had some gut level feelings, but I was probably too scared and didn't know what to do.
Right.
So you can do a lot of denying, even when something is fairly, my husband finding the alcohol missing several times. I ended up believing my son when he told me, and I started to suspect my husband was trying to cause problems.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
You're on a different journey. That had to be some stuff to that's a lot of stuff to take in and put on your plate. And my hat's off to you, to all the parents out there that have to deal with these things. But you're on a different journey now. This has educated you and put you on a different path, a path
Yeah.
of education. Tell the viewers what you're doing now to educate, empower, and to not have another parent or parents live that what you just went through.
Yes. So very quickly, I went back to college, got a degree, ended up going down the road of becoming a parent coach because I don't think there's enough support and encouragement, especially for parents of late teen and 20 something, because there really is a big transition in parenting during that time period. So, through the magic of social media, TikTok and Instagram specifically, I have received a big following because I jumped on to talk authentically about the experience I had as a parent and the fact that I wanted to help other parents. And in the last couple of years, I have created a large following around the country and now coach exclusively parents all over the US and Canada and France and Australia at times, um, with their young adults who have mental health issues, who have substance use issues, who are failing to launch. So I specialize in helping those parents create a plan and uncover actually the core issues, what's really going on.
Mhm.
First of all, the core issues, and then second, to create a plan to help them move their young adult forward incrementally, step by step.
Man, that's great. How can the viewers reach out to you to learn about your services and so forth?
Yes, they can. While I'm on TikTok and Instagram at Kim Muench Parent Coach, which is Muench. It says pinch, but It's Muench, Parent Coach, on both of those platforms. And then I do have, my business name is Real Life Parent Guide. So they can certainly go to my website, which is reallifeparentguide.com. And you mentioned, or I mentioned, that I had written a book. So if you want
I
to
was
know
getting ready to ask that. How do we get that book?
yeah. But if you want to know my entire parenting journey and all the stuff that we talked about today and then some, my book is called Becoming Me While Raising You: A Mother's Journey to Herself, and it's available on Kindle free and in paperback on Amazon.
You've been doing this for a while, so we're gonna wrap up. There's another couple of questions I want to ask. What are some of the things you've been doing this and educating and coaching? What are some of the repetitive things that you've seen with parents as you're teaching this, that you go, give me 3 things that you see repetitively with this program?
Their emotions get in the way of being an effective parent. Emotions like guilt and fear, for sure. They lack confidence. They lack confidence in their parenting because there's so much, and I'm included, but there's so much coming at parents all the time, and don't know what to look at or believe. So my coaching really helps them get back to, it's not that I have the answer, it's helping them get back to their own intuition about connecting with their son or daughter, because nobody knows your son or daughter like you. So it's about helping them clear that noise, really, really be able to focus and start trusting their gut instinct. So that's another thing. So gaining confidence, those emotions getting in the way, and then there really is a change in parenting, Andre, that's boomers and Gen X were raised in a certain way, and
Right.
these young today, you cannot parent them the way that we were parented, because when you do, you get all sorts of pushback and people cutting people out of their lives. And it really is about recognizing that we need to appreciate who our kids are rather than who we want or need them to be.
Right.
That doesn't, that we get that they can have their way, or that will financially pay for them for the rest of their lives and they don't have to work. It does mean that we need to meet them where they're at without enabling unhealthy behavior.
Man, that's deep. Before we wrap up, leave the viewers. You've been through a lot. My hat's off to you. Congratulations to your son. Happy belated birthday to your son. Leave the viewers with something positive that only Kim can even with.
Okay, so I'm going to tell you the quote that was given to me. It was downloaded to me, and it's the last page in my book, and it's something to really think about. And that's this: our children come through us, not for us, except for the lessons they reflect to us during their journey in an effort to grow us up along the way. So if you are having a difficult time with your son or daughter, what is that trying to teach you about yourself and about life?
Ladies and gentlemen, this has been other than the world famous. Look, I'm giving you the title already. The world famous Kim Muench, not Pinch, Muench, on the Andre The Beast Crayton show.